Star Wars 7x7 episode 3098. Power's back, which is fantastic, and even better that there are no giant sea creatures trying to devour us. It's a Phantom Menace joke for you. Small bit of humor, maybe. Anyway, so just in time, because today we're going to start our series of 2023 previews and 2022 year in review episodes, starting with the movie situation. Punch it! Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voiland, and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy. And thank you so much for joining me for it. So here is the scoop of the movie situation. There have been 7 different movies talked about over the course of 2022, and we are now in the space where if something's going to happen in 2025, we are going to hear about what it officially will be in 2023. And the reason that's the case is because, as we've done with our monthly preview episodes that we do on the first of every month, generally speaking, we have been looking at where The Force Awakens was in development, since that was the one that was starting from scratch. And because of the wonderful Art of the Force Awakens book, we have a timeline established for how things were in development leading up to the production of The Force Awakens. And so we can take that timeline and apply it to where we are right now, which is basically at the same point as it was in 2012, when we had just heard that Lucasfilm was being sold to Disney and that there would be a sequel trilogy in development. They had hired Michael Arndt to do a first pass, at least, on the screenplay for The Force Awakens, so it was already in development at that point in October of 2012, and then going into December of 2012, that was still where things were at. That screenplay was in development, and in 2012, in December, they were starting to pick out who their team would be for concept design and production design. So those teams were being assembled at that point. And we're basically at that same point right now, where if there is going to be a movie released in 2025, which is the next Star Wars date on the calendar, then those teams would be assembled in 2022, December, and early 2023. But which movie would that be for? All right, so let's talk about the 7 movies that were in some stage of development in 2022. First of all, we covered the fact that the J.G. Dillard movie that had been talked about previously is no longer in development. There was an interview that he did about that, which is unfortunate, of course, and it's also kind of the way things go sometimes. So that's one movie we can rule out. Another movie we can rule out is the first movie in Rian Johnson's trilogy, but not from the perspective of it's no longer in development. In fact, there were multiple interviews leading up to the release of Glass Onion, which is the sequel to the original Knives Out movie, where Rian Johnson reiterated that yes, he is still having conversations with Kathleen Kennedy about this thing. Yes, it is still a thing, and he's not going to really start working on it in earnest until he completes a trilogy of Knives Out movies, and the third one is now the one that he's going to be focused on writing. So yes, that one is further out, and so it's definitely not going to be the 2025 one, but it is one that is still on the docket down the line. Then we got word in late 2022 that Shawn Levy would be involved in developing and directing a Star Wars movie. Shawn Levy of Night at the Museum and Stranger Things fame. He did give an interview in December talking about how he is just so incredibly excited about the opportunity and that he is going to work his butt off to make sure that he comes up with a script that will absolutely get greenlit for him to direct. But he is in the middle of working on Deadpool 3, which is slated to come out in November of 2024. And he's also in development and working on Stranger Things Season 5, which will be the last season of Stranger Things. There is no release date officially for that yet. However, the horse race stuff says it's going to be coming out in 2024 sometime, and there's no indication of whether they will release all the episodes at once or whether they will, like they did with Season 4, do a split season situation. So either way, 2024 is going to be chock full of Shawn Levy stuff, and so it's highly unlikely that he would be involved in Star Wars for a 2025 release at all. He just is not going to have the bandwidth for it. Then, of course, there's the Kevin Feige Star Wars movie, which got a little bit of momentum because Michael Waldron was announced as the screenwriter who would be taking a shot at whatever that movie looks like. But this one is also not likely to be the 2025 movie because Michael Waldron has a lot of other things on his plate as well. He is part of the season 2 of Loki, heading to Disney Plus, and he's also working on at least one of the Avengers movies that's coming out. Specifically, it'll be the Secret Wars movie that's coming out in 2025. So yeah, unlikely that Star Wars 2025 is going to be a Kevin Feige, Michael Waldron production either. So that leaves us with 3 possibilities. First of all, we'll talk about Taika Waititi, who had been given a Star Wars movie or given the opportunity to do a Star Wars movie as early as 2020 when we got the announcement at the Disney Investor Day that happened in December of that year. So here we are 2 years later. Of course, he has been working on a few other movies, but now it seems like his slate is comparatively clear. We found out from him that he had started working on the screenplay, but that he wasn't very far along at all. This, I think, was back in July of 2022. And we know that he's supposed to be co-writing it with Krysty Wilson-Cairns, who was the Academy Award nominated screenwriter for 1917. And if that were to be the 2025 movie, well, then yeah, the clock is perfectly fine for that possibility because the script for The Force Awakens wasn't actually completed until January of 2014. So, 4 months before they started filming. So basically, Krysty and Taika would have to finish their script by, actually, the math is really easy on this. Would have to have their script completed by the end of 2023, ideally, for things to move forward with the 2025 release for them. Then there's the Patty Jenkins-helmed Rogue Squadron, which has had the most complicated history of all of the films currently in development with Lucasfilm. So as we started January of 2022, that was the film that seemed primed to take the 2023 spot on the Lucasfilm calendar. But then we found out later in the year that they were pushing it back. They were pushing it back for further development, and they would have had to have a script locked as these things get in Hollywood and ready to go to start principal photography in May of 2022 if they were going to hit the December 23 release. That obviously didn't happen, and so now we know it's in further development, but we had thought there had been reports that it was just utterly off the docket, and that had not been officially confirmed by Lucasfilm at all. Then there were recent reports toward the end of 2022 about stuff going on with Wonder Woman 3 and the changes happening over at Warner Brothers with the DC filmmaking situation, and supposedly something happened with Wonder Woman 3, and we don't necessarily know what is real because there's been some trade reports and some he said, she said stuff, but Patty Jenkins put out a statement, and we're not going to get into the DC stuff any further, but suffice it to say, for our purposes, the Star Wars-led project by Patty, that's Rogue Squadron, is still apparently active. They are still working on it, but I think we're in a position where we could potentially get solved. The development situation could get solved in time for it to be the 2025 movie. Again, they would have to have a script completed, hopefully by the end of 2024, so they have all next year to work on it and be in development for it. Not to mention, considering that that was the announced movie for 23, and based on what we know of the timetable for the development of The Force Awakens, it's very likely that concept art and production design art was already being developed by Lucasfilm. They were already actively working in pre-production on Rogue Squadron, so they probably have a ton of assets that are already useful and ready to go or ready to be further developed based on whatever happens with the script that Patty Jenkins is working on. They are really in a prime position for this to be the 2025 movie. They probably have all the assets they need, or they have a really great head start on it. However, there is one other contender that could possibly be the 2025 movie, and that is the comparatively recently announced Damon Lindelof movie. This is supposed to be co-written by Lindelof and Justin Britt Gibson, and according to Hollywood trade reports, there has been some sort of writer's room convened, like a 2-week thing where they quote-unquote broke the story, where they figured out what the deal is going to be with the story, to the point where then Lindelof and Britt Gibson could go and write the script. And supposedly there's already a director attached, Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy. Hope that pronunciation was close. And according to Hollywood trade reports, this allegedly has the quote-unquote most momentum of any movie in production at Lucasfilm right now. It's also a movie that, according to these Hollywood trade reports, would be taking place after the events of The Rise of Skywalker. We don't necessarily know how far past, but we have also heard the rumor that characters from the sequel trilogy might appear in there, and yes, a lot has been made within the last couple of weeks about the fact that Daisy Ridley was at the Lucasfilm offices having lunch with some folks, so, you know, related, not related, just, you know, friends in the neighborhood, who knows. So that's what we know about the movies that we know about that are in production at any stage at Lucasfilm right now. And as far as what the 2025 movie is going to be, well, it does seem like right now it's kind of a toss-up between Patty Jenkins and Damon Lindelof. We've got a lot of assets developed and a lot of development work done for Patty Jenkins' movie, but we also have the trade reports of Damon Lindelof and the writer's room and the momentum, quote-unquote. But whichever one it is, we will very likely know the answer in 2023, which is pretty exciting stuff. And that's what I've got for you for today's episode of the podcast. So it just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for it, as always, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2021 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.